So, imagine you have a completely broken public school system, right?
Hmm.
Just bloated, inefficient, and test scores have been stagnating for like
Oh,
years.
yeah. The total bureaucratic nightmare.
Exactly. And the government decides to fix it with this radical multi-billion-dollar experiment. They basically say, you know what? The era of the neighborhood monopoly is over.
Right? They just blow the whole thing up.
Yeah. From this day forward, they are giving every single family a voucher. And this piece of paper represents the total sum of their kids' educational funding. And they give them absolute unrestricted freedom to take that kid to any private school they want.
So you take all that power away from the central government, the bureaucrats, and you hand it directly to the consumer, parents.
Right, exactly. And the economists at the time, I mean, some of the most brilliant minds on the planet, looked at this theoretical model and they made a massive prediction.
A huge one, yeah.
They promised that unleashing this kind of, fierce free market competition wouldn't just give us a little bump in grades. They actually predicted it would boost the overall productivity of the education system by an astonishing 60 to 70%.
Which is, I mean, to put it mildly, that is a promised miracle.
Mhm.
If you increase a nation's educational output by 70%, you fundamentally alter the trajectory of its entire economy for generations.
But what if you run that experiment and then 20 years later the dust finally settles and you look at the test scores and nothing happened?
Wait, like nothing at all.
Actually, worse than nothing. What if handing out absolute choice didn't create this generation of geniuses, but actually, caused more students to fail and quietly tore the society apart from the inside?
That is the ultimate, totally counterintuitive reality we are exploring today. Is the kind of outcome that just slaps you in the face.
It really does.
It forces you to completely rethink how human beings actually behave when you turn them into data points in a market.
So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking you on a journey into one of the most fascinating, misunderstood, and frankly, really heavily debated natural experiments in modern history.
Yeah, the scale of this is just wild.
It is. The laboratory for this was the entire nation of Chile, starting back in 1981. And our guide for this journey is a landmark study published in 2006. It was in the Journal of Public Economics by two really brilliant economists, Chang-Tai Hsieh and Miguel Urquiola.
And before we dive into the actual numbers here, we need to establish a very strict neutrality check for you, the listener. Because when you talk about the 1981 Chilean reforms, you are inherently talking about the Pinochet regime.
Right. It's impossible to separate the two historically.
Exactly. You are throwing words like school vouchers and unrestricted free markets into the mix.
Yeah.
And those are some of the most highly charged, deeply partisan political third rails on the planet.
Totally. I mean, both left-wing and right-wing commentators, politicians, think tanks, they have all used this specific history as a political football for decades.
Oh, absolutely. Either to praise the magic of privatization or condemn it as entirely evil.
Right, but in this deep dive, we are checking our politics at the door. We aren't here to take sides on the ideology of free markets versus government control. We are here to look at the cold, hard micro data.
Just the numbers.
Just the numbers. We're looking at the regression analyses, the standardized test scores, the actual enrollment logs.
We are simply reporting on the findings contained in this original 2006 source material to show you what actually happens when you expose an entire generation of students to a pure, unadulterated market experiment.
Yeah, we're going to look at why that expected 60 to 70% miracle never materialized, right? And how these newly formed schools figured out how to manipulate the rules of the game to survive.
And how this system, perhaps by accident, ended up building these massive invisible walls between different classes of children.
Okay, so let's set the stage. We need to travel back to 1980. So the day before this sweeping reform changed everything, what did the educational landscape even look like in Chile for an average family?
Well, to understand the sheer scale of what they attempted, you really have to picture a classic, deeply centralized, top-down bureaucracy. I mean, prior to 1981, roughly 80% of all Chilean students were enrolled in what were known as fiscal schools.
Fiscal schools, so basically traditional public schools.
Exactly. And they were controlled entirely by the National Ministry of Education.
So all the decisions were made at the top.
Right. The ministry in the capital city, they hired the teachers, paid the salaries, designed the curriculum, and assigned the budgets. The local towns had very little say in the matter. It was a giant, monolithic monopoly.
Which, if you are a free market economist, is pretty much your worst nightmare.
Oh, it's the ultimate enemy.
Yeah.
And alongside that giant public monopoly, You had a tiny sliver of private education.
Like elite prep schools.
Yeah, exactly. Elite, tuition-charging private schools serving the wealthiest 6 or 7% of the country, the traditional upper class.
Yeah.
And then you had a handful of subsidized private schools, many of them Catholic or run by other nonprofits. They received some irregular, somewhat unreliable government funding and served maybe 15% of the students.
But the vast, vast majority of the country just went to the state-run fiscal school down the street.
Precisely. But then comes 1981, and the government decides to completely rewrite the DNA of the country's infrastructure.
They looked at the theories coming out of places like the Chicago School of Economics, right? Championed by figures like Milton Friedman.
Yes. And they decided to take those textbook theories and just apply them to the real world on a massive scale.
Which is terrifying and fascinating. So the reform had two major pillars. Let's talk about the first one.
The first was decentralization. They took those central ministry schools and handed the keys over to the local municipalities.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They essentially said to the local mayors, hey, these are your schools now. You manage them.
Which honestly sounds reasonable on its face. I mean, local control usually makes sense. But the second pillar is the explosive one, the real powder keg, the universal voucher system.
This is where it gets radical. The government said to every single family in the country, rich, poor, middle class here is a voucher.
Like a literal ticket.
Yep. This piece of paper represents your child's educational funding. You can take this voucher to your newly decentralized local public municipal school, or you can take it to a private school that agrees to accept it.
And here is the rule that sets the whole game in motion. It's brilliantly simple, but it is ruthlessly Darwinian. Public schools and private voucher schools received the exact same per-student payment from the government.
The money literally followed the backpack.
Wow.
If a child walked out the front door of the municipal public school and walked into the private school down the street, the public school lost that funding instantly, and the private school gained it.
Okay, I want to pause here and really explore the logic of this because I want to play the role of the believer for a second. Let's map this onto a normal business.
Okay, let's do it.
So if I open a bakery in a neighborhood that only has one state-run bakery, right? And the state-run bakery makes terrible, stale bread. People are forced to eat it because they have no choice. It's a monopoly.
Right, they have a captive audience.
Exactly. The bakers there don't care if the bread is good because they get paid anyway.
That is the exact critique of the public school monopoly. Guaranteed students, guaranteed funding, zero incentive to innovate.
Right. But the moment you introduce a voucher, you give the townspeople a choice. Suddenly, if I open my new private bakery and I make amazing fresh croissants, the customers will flock to me. Their money follows them.
Naturally.
And the state-run bakery is suddenly faced with this terrifying reality. Either they learn to bake better bread or they go bankrupt. The survival of their institution now depends entirely on the quality of their product.
Exactly.
So why wouldn't that exact same localized existential pressure force these schools to hire the best math teachers, invest in the best science labs, and stay up late tutoring kids? I mean, the survival of their business depends on it.
Your logic is flawless. And it is exactly the logic that drove the policy. The economists viewed the student as a customer, the school as a firm, and education as a product.
It's pure economics.
Right. The prediction of a 60 to 70% increase in productivity was based on the mathematical certainty that firms in a competitive market will optimize their production to survive.
They believed schools would fight tooth and nail to offer the highest academic achievement, because a school with low test scores would simply lose its customers and fold.
And the market responded instantly to this new incentive structure. I mean, the data from the early years of the reform is just staggering. It was like an absolute gold rush.
It really was.
It was the Wild West. Within just 5 years, between 1982 and 1985, over 1,000 new private voucher schools plopped up across the country out of nowhere.
Over 1,000.
1,000 new institutions.
To put that in perspective, the public sector went from holding an 80% monopoly to watching a tidal wave of new competitors open up shop right across the street.
Yeah, literally overnight.
By 1988, the private school enrollment rate had skyrocketed from roughly 20% to over 40% nationwide.
And in many urban areas, it actually surpassed 50%. Half the kids in the city just packed up and left the public system.
But here is a crucial detail that Hsieh and Urquiola point out in the study, and it's a detail that completely changed the nature of education in Chile, who was opening all these new schools.
Right, because before 1981, the private subsidized schools were mostly religious, Catholic schools, nonprofits, organizations that had a foundational mission that wasn't strictly about making money.
Yeah, they were doing it for, like, ideological or religious reasons.
Exactly. But when the researchers dug into the characteristics of the 1,000 new schools that popped up after the voucher reform, they found that by 1988, 84% of these new private voucher entrants were strictly for-profit businesses.
Wait, 84%. So these aren't nuns opening a parish school.
No, not at all. These are entrepreneurs. They were business people who saw a highly reliable, government-guaranteed revenue stream, the voucher payment, and they set up shop specifically to capture it. They were operating under the exact same profit-maximizing motives as your theoretical baker.
Okay, so the stage is perfectly set. We have smashed the monopoly. We have 1,000 new, hungry, for-profit businesses fighting for customers. The money is flowing freely.
It's all happening according to plan.
Right. If the mathematical models are right, this is the exact moment we should see a renaissance in human intelligence. We should see test scores shooting through the roof. But when Hsieh and Urquiola finally got their hands on the microdata decades later, what did they actually find?
They found what we can only describe as a grand illusion. The free market worked perfectly in terms of reallocating capital. The private schools boomed. Massive amounts of government money shifted to the private sector. The infrastructure changed completely.
But the scores.
But the actual product, the amount of knowledge inside the heads of the children didn't improve by a single point.
It is honestly hard to wrap my head around. The data is just cold and ruthless.
Let's talk about how the researchers proved this, because they didn't just look at a simple national average. That wouldn't tell you the whole story.
Right, because averages can hide a lot of local variation.
Exactly. They went incredibly deep. They looked at panel data across roughly 150 distinct municipalities, which they call communes in Chile, over several years.
So what does a commune look like in this context?
Think of it like a distinct local educational market. Some communes are dense urban centers with dozens of schools packed together. Others are more rural, where maybe only one or two private schools bother to open.
Oh, I see.
This natural variation is a statistician's dream. It allows you to isolate the towns where the private schools aggressively took over the market, wiping out the public school monopolies, and compare them to towns where the public monopoly stayed relatively intact.
Got it. So according to the Chicago school theory, the towns that experience the absolute fiercest, most cutthroat market competition should be the shining cities on the hill. Those should be the towns where the kids are suddenly acing calculus and writing brilliant essays.
Precisely. If competition breeds excellence, the towns with the most private school penetration should have the highest test score gains. So Hsieh and Urquiola ran the regression coefficients.
Okay.
They mapped the change in the private enrollment rate against the change in the town's overall test scores. And the result they got was, well, nothing.
Just a flat line.
A completely flat, statistically insignificant line. They looked at standardized math scores. Flatlined.
Wow.
They looked at language and reading scores. Flatlined. They looked at the average years of schooling completed by the children in those towns. Completely flat. It was an academic stagnant water.
Wait, I have to stop you there. Because if I go back to my bakery analogy, if there are a dozen bakeries fighting for my money, the bread has to get better or they all go out of business.
Right.
How is it physically possible to have a booming, highly competitive market where hundreds of new businesses are fighting for customers, but the actual product doesn't improve at all?
That is the central mystery the authors set out to solve. And before we get to the how, we have to look at a piece of data that makes it even worse. Because it wasn't just that the scores flatlined. In some places, the educational outcomes actually went backward.
Yes. The study reveals what I like to call the repetition paradox. It's a real slap in the face to anyone who assumed choice automatically equals quality.
It really is.
In the specific towns that experienced the absolute highest private school growth, the places with the most intense competition, student grade repetition rates actually went up.
Let's make sure we unpack exactly what that means. A higher grade repetition rate means more kids are failing their classes, not meeting the basic standards, and being held back to repeat the same grade for another entire year.
And the researchers put a number on it. They found the standard deviation increased by 0.24. Now, for the listener, how big of a deal is a 0.24 standard deviation increase in this context?
Okay, let's step away from the math jargon for a second. When economists talk about standard deviation, they are talking about how widely things vary from the normal average. Imagine a typical town where maybe one or two kids in a large grade cohort get held back each year. It happens, but it's rare.
Yeah, pretty standard.
An increase of 0.24 standard deviations is not a statistical rounding error. It means that suddenly, across the entire town, there is a noticeable, undeniable surge in kids failing out.
That's horrifying.
You are seeing entire rows of desks filled with older kids who didn't pass. So the ultimate measurable reward for breaking the monopoly and unleashing 1,000 for-profit educational businesses wasn't a generation of geniuses. It was a statistically significant increase in children failing.
That is wild. And if you want to zoom out from the individual towns and look at the international stage, the reality check is even harsher.
Oh, the international data is damning.
Because you might think, well, maybe the tests inside Chile were just badly designed, right? But the researchers didn't just look inside Chile. They looked at the TIMSS data.
The TIMSS, the Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study, it is one of the most highly respected global benchmarks in education.
And it tests middle schoolers around the world, right?
Exactly. It tests them to see how nations stack up against each other in hard sciences and math.
And what's incredible about Chile is that they participated in a precursor to this exact test back in 1970.
Right, which was a full decade before the voucher reform was even a thought.
And then they participated again in 1999, which was nearly 2 decades into this grand free market experiment.
So you have a perfect, unadulterated before and after snapshot of the country's global standing.
Exactly. So what happened?
The authors compared Chile's performance against 12 other nations that also took the test in both 1970 and 1999. They looked at the median student, the kid sitting right in the middle of the bell curve.
Hi.
If the 60 to 70% productivity miracle had happened, Chile should have rocketed up the international rankings.
But they didn't. The median Chilean students' performance didn't improve at all relative to the global pack.
Not at all.
In fact, the economists had to control for things like GDP growth and national education spending because Chile's economy was actually booming during this period due to other macroeconomic factors.
Right, they had a lot of copper wealth and other things going on.
Yeah, and when they controlled for that extra wealth, Chile actually fell slightly behind where they should have been.
It is the absolute definition of spinning your wheels in the mud. Despite nearly 20 years of the most radical, comprehensive marketization of education on Earth, pouring massive amounts of public funds into private hands, the national team's performance on the global stage actually slightly regressed.
Okay, so we are back to my question. The data is undeniable. The experiment failed to produce the miracle. But why? How does a competitive market produce a stagnant or even worse product?
This raises the most important question of the entire study, and it strikes at the very heart of where the original economic models failed. The economists assumed that schools would compete on teaching quality.
Which seems logical.
It does. But think about what improving teaching actually requires in the real world.
It's not like tweaking a recipe for bread.
Exactly. It is incredibly hard. It is immensely expensive. If you want to genuinely raise test scores, you have to hire elite teachers, which costs a premium.
Yeah, good teachers aren't cheap.
You have to train them continuously. You have to invest in new pedagogy, new science labs, better textbooks. You have to endure years of trial and error to see if a new curriculum works. It takes a decade to see real results from true educational reform.
It's a high cost, high uncertainty, and incredibly slow payoff.
Right. But remember who opened these new schools. 84% of them were for-profit businesses.
Oh, wow. Right.
They didn't have a decade to wait for a slow payoff. They had investors or they had their own bottom line to worry about. They needed to show high average test scores immediately in order to put those numbers on their promotional brochures, attract the middle-class parents, and secure those government vouchers.
And it turns out there is a much faster, much cheaper, and perfectly legal way for a school to instantly look like it has brilliant teaching without actually improving its teaching at all.
This is the dark secret of the market. We call it cream skimming or academic screening.
If you are a school principal and your entire operating budget depends on having a high average test score to show the parents, do you spend a massive fortune hiring specialized tutors to try and turn struggling, disadvantaged students into scholars?
Ooh.
Or do you just put a bouncer at the door and refuse to admit the kids who struggle in the first place?
Boom. That is the loophole that broke the model. The study reveals that the absolute freedom of choice didn't lead to a revolution in pedagogy. It led to intense, ruthless, highly efficient academic screening.
Let's break down exactly how this screening worked because the playing field wasn't level.
Not at all.
Yeah.
You see, the public municipal schools were still operating under government mandate. Legally, they had to take everyone.
Everyone, no exceptions.
Right. If a kid showed up at the public school door with a voucher, the public school had to give them a desk. It didn't matter if that kid had severe learning disabilities, a history of behavioral issues, or came from a family in deep poverty. The public school was the ultimate safety net.
But the new private voucher schools, they had no such obligation. They were private entities. They could reject whoever they wanted for almost any reason.
And reject they did. The data shows this resulted in a massive, rapid, one-way migration out of the public system. But it wasn't a random sample of the population that left.
No, it was a highly selective exodus.
The brightest kids.
Mm-hmm.
The kids who already had high test scores before the reform even happened.
Right.
The kids whose parents had higher incomes, more years of formal education, and the time and resources to shop around for schools. Those families packed up their vouchers and fled the public system.
And because these high-performing, high socioeconomic status students left in droves, what happened to the public schools they left behind?
Their averages collapsed.
Yeah.
I mean, if you take the top 20% of the smartest kids out of a school, the average test score of that school plummets overnight.
Instantly.
The socioeconomic status, what sociologists call the SES of the public school student body, absolutely plummeted relative to the average of their own local communities.
This is exactly what the authors tracked. This wasn't a rising tide lifting all boats. It was a lifeboat situation where the most resourced families paddled away, leaving the public schools as dumping grounds for the most disadvantaged kids.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
I think an analogy perfectly captures the absurdity of what happened here. Let's do another one. Imagine a new gym opens up in your town.
Okay, hit Jim.
And their marketing is incredibly aggressive. They claim they have a revolutionary new workout program, like a proprietary mix of machines and routines that absolutely guarantees you will get shredded in 30 days.
I've seen those ads.
Right. And to prove it, they show you that every single member walking out of their gym has a literal six-pack. They look like fitness models.
As a consumer, you look at that and say, wow, their workout program must be a miracle. Take my money.
Exactly. But their dark secret is that they don't actually have a better workout program. They have the exact same rusty dumbbells as the YMCA down the street.
So what's the trick?
Their secret is that they put a bouncer at the front door who forces everyone to take their shirt off, and they only allow people who already have six-packs to buy a membership.
They filter out the out-of-shape people at the door. That's brilliant.
Yes. The gym didn't make those people fit. The gym didn't add any fitness value to the town. They just aggressively concentrated all the already fit people into one building so they could claim the credit.
That is a phenomenal analogy, and it perfectly encapsulates what economists call the zero-sum game of education.
The zero-sum game.
Yes, and if you connect this to the bigger picture, it explains the central mystery why the national and town-wide test scores never went up, even as private schools boasted about their amazing results.
Walk me through the math of the zero-sum game.
Okay, imagine a closed system, a town with two schools, School A and School B. School A is the public municipal school. School B is the new for-profit voucher school. Let's say there are 100 kids in the town, and total brainpower or learning is a fixed number.
Okay, 100 kids.
School B opens up, conducts entrance exams, and aggressively recruits the 10 smartest kids from School A.
The fitness models.
Right. Suddenly, School B calculates its average test score, and it shoots through the roof. They look like absolute geniuses of education. They print new brochures.
They look amazing.
Meanwhile, School A recalculates its average without its 10 best students, and their score drops drastically. They look like catastrophic failures.
But if you zoom out...
If you zoom out and look at the whole town, the combination of School A and School B, the total amount of learning hasn't changed by a single point.
Wow.
No individual child actually got smarter. The brain power was simply rearranged geographically to make one private institution look vastly superior to the public one.
It is a pure illusion of progress, fueled by the aggressive poaching of the best peers.
Which leads us to a really uncomfortable realization about human psychology. Because if you are one of these new for-profit schools, you have a problem. How do you convince those middle-class parents to actually go through the hassle of leaving a free public school for your free private school?
Right, because switching schools is a pain.
It is. You can't just show them test scores forever. You have to sell them something deeper. And it turns out you don't actually sell them on the curriculum. You sell them on exclusivity.
This is where the marketing aspect comes in, and it's fascinating to see how rapidly the market adapted to human desires. These new voucher schools realized very quickly that what parents actually desired, deep down, wasn't necessarily a more rigorous math program or a better library.
Right, that's just the surface excuse.
What they wanted, instinctively, was a good peer group for their children.
Meaning they wanted their kids sitting next to other kids from good families. Families with similar incomes, similar backgrounds, similar values.
Precisely. Economists call this peer effects. It is the understanding that a child learns as much from the kids sitting next to them as they do from the teacher at the chalkboard.
Oh, for sure.
If you are surrounded by highly motivated, well-behaved kids whose parents read to them every night, you will likely do better.
It's like a community potluck dinner.
Oh, I like this. Go on.
If you have a neighborhood potluck, the quality of the meal depends entirely on what the guests bring.
True.
If the 5 people who always cook the amazing gourmet dishes decide to leave the community center and form their own exclusive dinner party across the street, the original potluck gets remarkably worse.
Yeah, you're just left with the store-bought potato salad.
Exactly. The community center didn't change, the tables didn't change, but the quality of the meal collapsed because the customers were actually providing the value.
That is exactly it. The schools commodified the peer group. They realized the other students are the product.
Right.
And to signal to middle-class parents that they had secured the right peers, the gourmet chefs of the potluck, so to speak, these newly minted for-profit voucher schools adopted a very specific set of cultural symbols.
The paper notes some wild details about this.
It's crazy.
These schools weren't trying to look like modern, innovative tech hubs. They wanted to look like the old, ultra-rich, tuition-charging elite schools that the top 6% of the country went to.
Yes. They introduced strict, formal, British-style uniforms.
They gave themselves fancy English names, which is incredible when you remember they are operating in Spanish-speaking Chile.
Right. It was a blatant signal of class and aspiration.
But the most important tool they used, the real filter, wasn't the uniform. It was the admissions process. The instituted mandatory parental interviews.
Ah.
Those parental interviews were the invisible bouncers at the door. Think about it. An interview isn't a standardized math test. It isn't strictly assessing the child's academic potential.
No, not at all.
It is a social and psychological barrier. It allows the school administration to assess the parent vocabulary, their dress, their occupation, their level of involvement.
It's a vibe check for social class.
Exactly, a vibe check. And it was highly effective. It was designed to ensure that poorer families, or families with parents who lacked formal education, and might feel intimidated by a formal interview, or families with children who had obvious behavioral quirks, simply wouldn't even bother to apply.
The friction was just too high.
Way too high.
It is brilliant from a ruthless business perspective and deeply chilling from a societal perspective. You are manufacturing a fake elite. You are selling the illusion of upper class status to the middle class simply by excluding the poor.
And the data the authors used to prove that this sorting actually happened is just ironclad.
They didn't just find a few anecdotes of schools doing this, did they?
No. They ran incredibly deep regression analyses. And we should explain how they did this because it's a masterclass in economic research.
Yeah, please do.
They needed to prove that the private schools were the cause of the segregation, and not just that segregation happened to occur at the same time due to other factors like urbanization or a changing economy.
So how do you isolate that?
They used something called instrumental variables. They looked at factors like the historical urbanization rate of a town, its total population size, and historical inequality metrics from before 1981.
Okay.
They used these as a baseline to predict how much private school growth a town should have had, and then compared that to what actually happened. They mathematically filtered out the background noise to isolate the exact impact of a child taking a voucher and moving to a private school.
And the math perfectly tracked the segregation. The numbers they found are staggering. They proved that for every single standard deviation increase in a town's private school enrollment, meaning the deeper the private for-profit market penetrated a specific local town, the relative income of the families who were left behind in the public schools dropped by an incredible 38% to 43% of a standard deviation.
Let's translate those statistics into ground-level reality.
Okay.
It means that the more developed and competitive a town's educational market became, the more brutally and efficiently the children were segregated by social class. The free market acted as a giant, hyper-efficient sorting machine. It sifted the children by family income, by parental education, and by baseline test scores.
It just sorted everyone out.
Yep. It scooped up the middle class, placed them into branded voucher schools with English names, and left the poorest, most vulnerable children behind in municipal public schools that were rapidly draining of resources and positive peer role models.
Wait, I have to push back on this.
Okay, go for it.
Because there is a massive contradiction here with how these policies are sold to the public. The original foundational promise of the voucher system, the exact moral argument that politicians use to justify privatization to this day, is that it gives poor kids a ticket out of failing public school.
Right, that's the whole pitch.
The whole rhetoric is about liberating low-income families from their zip codes. Are you telling me that this freedom actually just built an invisible wall that trapped them even harder?
If we look strictly at the data presented by Hsieh and Urquiola, the answer is a definitive yes.
That's devastating.
The freedom of choice was technically real on paper. A poor family theoretically held the exact same government voucher in their hand as a middle-class family. They had the legal right to apply anywhere?
Theoretically.
Right. But the market dynamics, specifically the fact that the private schools held the ultimate veto power over admissions, meant that the freedom only truly flowed upward.
Because freedom of choice doesn't mean anything if the school can just choose not to choose you.
Exactly. When you create a market where schools can select their students and where parents value peer effects above almost everything else, the market will naturally optimize for sorting those peers.
It is vastly cheaper and more profitable to filter students by class than it is to actually teach them better.
Yes. The resulting societal segregation wasn't an accident. It wasn't a glitch in the system. It was the most profitable, mathematically efficient outcome for the private providers.
Okay, but this brings up a massive logical flaw in the whole system. A flaw that completely short-circuits the original economic theory of competition.
What's the flaw?
We've established that the public schools lost their best students. They lost massive amounts of their funding because the vouchers literally walked out the door and went to the private school.
Correct. Enrollment in the public sector plummeted from roughly 80% down to under 60% nationally, and even lower in major cities.
So in a normal free market, if a business loses nearly half of its customers, loses half of its revenue, and is left serving only the most difficult, high-cost clients, it goes bankrupt.
It fails.
It closes its doors, the building gets sold. So why didn't these failing, half-empty public schools just shut down? Why didn't the market clear out the losers?
That is the ultimate flaw in how free market theory was applied to a public good.
Okay.
The public schools never face true bankruptcy. They were immune to the ultimate penalty of the market.
Why? I mean, if they lost the voucher money, how did they pay the light bill?
Because public schools are not just businesses. They are embedded in local politics and community fabric.
Oh, politics, of course.
Yeah. Despite the massive, catastrophic loss of students, the aggregate number of public municipal schools barely dropped at all across the entire 20-year experiment. The buildings stayed open. The teachers kept showing up.
How is that financially possible?
Local mayors and municipal officials were facing intense political realities. I mean, you have teachers' unions fighting for jobs. You have community pride tied up in the neighborhood school.
Right. Nobody wants their local school to close.
Exactly. You have the simple, undeniable fact that closing down a neighborhood school, even a failing one, is political suicide for a local mayor. Parents get angry. Communities feel abandoned.
Also, what do they do?
So instead of letting the market ruthlessly cull the weak schools, the municipalities found ways to artificially keep them on life support.
They bail them out.
Yes. They cross-subsidized them. They took money from other parts of the municipal budget, maybe roads, maybe sanitation, maybe local taxes, and funneled it into the public schools to make up for the lost vouchers.
Ah. So the threat of death was completely fake. The sword hanging over the head of the public school monopoly was made of plastic.
Precisely. The public schools were essentially too big to fail.
Wow.
And because the threat of closure wasn't real, the fundamental incentive to radically reinvent themselves, fire bad teachers, and improve their curriculum was totally blunted.
Because they knew the mayor would save them.
Right. They didn't have to get better to survive. They just limped along, operating half-empty buildings, serving the most disadvantaged kids in the commune, while drawing on municipal bailouts to keep the lights on.
This is unbelievable. So let me get this straight. You have private schools that don't need to actually improve their teaching because they can just screen for the best kids and look good on paper.
Yep.
And you have public schools that don't need to improve their teaching because the local mayor won't let them go bankrupt no matter how many kids leave.
It is a perfect storm of misaligned incentives.
No wonder the national test scores flatlined. Literally no one in the entire system is actually economically incentivized to do the hard work of teaching better.
It's a profound realization. And we can see the tragic culmination of these misaligned incentives when we look at the unbridgeable gap between the different tiers of schools over time.
Right. The authors did a deep dive into the historical gap. They looked at the data from 1982, right at the start of the gold rush, and compared it to 1996, well over a decade later.
And they looked at a very specific comparison.
Yeah, they compared the publicly funded schools, and by that I mean both the municipal public schools and the new for-profit voucher schools, since both were running on government money. And they compared them against those old, elite, tuition-charging private schools.
The ones that serve the top 6% of the wealthiest families.
The true elite. Now, if the voucher system had worked as intended, if market competition was driving up quality, you would expect the newly privatized, highly competitive voucher schools to start closing the gap with those ultra-elite schools.
Right. You would think so.
Because they are private businesses now, they should be innovating and catching up.
But the data shows the exact opposite.
It does.
In 1982, there was a massive gap in test scores between the publicly funded sector and the elite private sector. About 1.3 standard deviations. That is a chasm.
A massive difference in educational attainment.
But by 1996, after 14 years of the most intense free market competition imaginable, that gap hadn't shrunk. It had actually widened.
The voucher schools didn't catch up to the elite class at all.
No, they never threatened the true top tier of society. The upper class remained completely insulated. All the voucher system did was create a new, highly segregated middle tier for the middle class, while leaving the poorest citizens behind in empty, failing public schools.
The gap between the top and the bottom stretched even further.
Exactly.
It's just wild when you step back and look at the whole picture, the entire 20-year history. We basically watched a country spend massive amounts of political capital, completely upend an entire nation's educational infrastructure, and funnel billions of dollars into private hands just to play a giant, incredibly expensive game of musical chairs.
Musical chairs with the exact same pool of smart students.
Yes. The music plays, the kids scramble to find a seat in a school with an English name and a British uniform, the smartest kids get the chairs, and the poorest kids are left standing.
And at the end of the game, nobody actually learned anything new.
The total brain power of the room is exactly the same.
That is a phenomenal way to summarize it. And it represents a profound, earth-shaking revision of modern economic theory. This paper by Hsieh and Urquiola forced the economics field to take a hard look in the mirror.
I can imagine.
It forced them to realize that you cannot treat a school exactly like a factory that makes widgets.
Because the widget doesn't talk back. The widget doesn't have a family income. And crucially, the widget doesn't learn from the widget sitting next to it on the assembly line.
Exactly. When a market features peer effects, where the customers themselves are a crucial part of the product being sold, and you combine that with total freedom for both buyers and sellers to choose and reject each other, the market will naturally, inevitably optimize for segregation, not efficiency.
It is a chilling mathematical lesson for any nation on earth trying to privatize its core public services. You can introduce all the competition you want, but if the easiest way to win the competition is to exclude the weak, the market will choose exclusion every single time.
Every single time.
Okay, let's bring this all together. We've covered a massive amount of ground today, and the data paints a crystal clear picture. What the Hsieh and Urquiola data set of over 150 towns definitively proves is that giving parents vouchers and letting the free market run wild in Chile did not result in a 70% boost in national brain power.
The economic miracle never arrived.
Math scores flatlined, language scores flatlined, global TIMS rankings regressed.
Yep.
Instead, it spawned a Wild West environment of for-profit schools that quickly realized a fundamental dark truth of the market. It is vastly cheaper and faster to filter kids by social class than it is to actually do the hard work of teaching them.
They sold British uniforms and exclusivity.
They poached the top students through parental interviews, and they built a segregation machine that fractured the public system, driving up grade repetition rates, while the elite gap grew wider than ever.
It is a profound cautionary tale. It forces us to recognize the difference between the theoretical freedom to choose and the very real, very dangerous power to exclude.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener. Because while we've been talking about Chile in the 1980s and 90s, the underlying mechanics of this story, the promise of tech, the promise of choice, the danger of sorting, are repeating themselves right now today.
Oh, absolutely. History rhymes.
We are standing at the absolute edge of the AI era. Right now, tech companies, venture capitalists, and educational startups are promising that AI tutors, algorithmic learning pathways, and digital platforms will finally give every single child infinite free choice.
Yeah, you hear it all the time.
They're promising that this new technology will liberate students from the monopoly of the traditional, slow-moving public school classroom, just like the Chicago school economists promised in 1981.
The language they use in their pitch decks is almost identical.
Yeah.
Disruption, personalization, breaking the monopoly.
It really is. It's the same promise in a digital wrapper. But as this deep dive into the hard data has shown us, when we let unrestricted markets and algorithms sort our students, it rarely results in a sudden utopian explosion of genius.
It results in optimization.
Exactly. Algorithms are designed by their very nature to find the most efficient route to a metric. And as we learned today, the most efficient route to high scores isn't always better teaching, it's better sorting. So, as we hand over the future of education to the digital market, you have to ask yourself, in the coming AI education revolution, is this new technology actually going to raise the bar of human knowledge for everyone?
Is it going to do the hard work of lifting up the kids who are struggling the most?
Or is it just going to build a faster, cheaper, and vastly more invisible digital wall between those who know how to game the system and those who are left behind?
Are we just building a digital algorithmic version of that bouncer at the gym door?
That is the question we leave you with. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the data and for stepping into the muddy, complicated reality with us. We'll see you on the next deep dive.